This is the first part of the series, How to Solder. In this video, we're going to have a quick look at foundation knowledge for soldering. Soldering is a clever method of attaching two metal surfaces together. Now for us electronic enthusiasts, that normally means that we're going to attach the pad of a PCB to a component with some solder that's rated for electrical use. I have this demonstration board, and to start with I'm going to use these large square pads. Now this is just for practice and demonstration, so I'm going to use a large soldering tip so that you can see, or at least I hope you can see. Most solder will begin to melt at about 200 degrees Celsius. Some much more than this, and some a bit less, but most solders will start to melt about this temperature. The first concept I'd like to share with you is this idea of thermal mass. Now thermal mass is not temperature. Think of it like the volume of heat, sort of how much hot water there is in a cup. A small cup will hold a small amount of water, or of whatever temperature that water is, and a big cup is going to hold a lot of water, of whatever temperature that water is. Soldering is something similar to this. Different soldering irons will hold different amounts of thermal mass, and that's because of a number of factors. The type and quality of the tip, the type and quality of the heating element, the power of the soldering, the ambient temperature, all sorts of things come into play with this. All these factors influence how much thermal mass there is available to pour into the PCB pad. The moment you touch the soldering tip to something cooler, heat is going to begin to pour out of the tip and into the pad, or the solder, or whatever the soldering tip is touching. Now this leans into our next observation. Just like emptying a cup of water, it takes time for the water to pour out of a cup. So too it's the same with soldering. It takes time for the heat to move out of your soldering tip and onto the surface you want to heat. Look at this. Here I've got my soldering iron turned on and set to 300 degrees Celsius. I've got my cleaning sponge here and it's damp. This is too wet. This is too dry. You want to wet your sponge. The idea of wetting your sponge is to prevent the sponge from being damaged when the hot soldering iron wipes across the sponge for cleaning, and you want to keep your soldering iron clean. I'm going to put a little bit of solder on the tip of my soldering iron. I do this for lots of reasons, but just for now do it to see where the hot part of the soldering tip is, because the solder is going to flow to the hottest part of the tip. Put the hot part of the soldering tip onto the pad. Here, I'm putting the tip onto the edge of the pad so you can see what's happening. But when you do this, you probably want to put the hot spot in the middle of the pad to heat the pad more evenly. Wait a short amount of time for the copper pad to heat up. If you've not done much soldering before, I recommend you count to 3 hippopotami. Let's do it together. 1 hippopotamus, 2 hippopotamus, 3 hippopotamus. Now touch the solder to the pad and the solder will melt. See how I'm not touching the tip of the soldering iron. Some people think for some reason that you've got to touch the solder against the tip of the soldering iron in order to start to get the solder to flow, but that's not right. The soldering iron is only there to provide heat. Now the last thing that I do is clean the soldering tip. Put a bit of solder, just a little, and put it back in the holder. You want to leave that bit of solder on the soldering iron because when you go to use it next, you're going to heat the soldering iron up and wipe off the solder and leave behind a nice clean surface to use. So, thanks for watching.